Whether Boise State Public Radio brings a smile to your day, some inspiration, or a greater connection to Idaho and the world, we're proud to be here with you. Federal funding, about $1.60 per person annually, helps keep these trusted services strong and accessible to everyone in our community. Learn how you can safeguard local public media stations like ours by visiting protectmypublicmedia.org.
More Idaho Matters now from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News. I'm Gemma Gaudette. Despite being ranked as one of the safest states in the country, Idaho has the highest rate of incarcerated women in the United States. This fact was detailed in a recent report from the Idaho Justice Project, highlighting that while there are many pathways to prison, getting out and staying out can be much harder, which is why community programs like the one offered by the Boise Bicycle Project are so important. For a few years now, the nonprofit has partnered with the Idaho Department of Corrections for Shifting Gears. It's a program that gives female inmates a chance to learn new skills by fixing bicycles and giving back to kids in need, while also building community ties. And now BBP is expanding this program. So joining us to talk more about the work they're doing and the state of women's incarceration in Idaho are Devin McComas, the executive director of the Boise Bicycle Project, and Erica Marshall, executive director of the Idaho Justice Project. I want to welcome both of you to the program.
Awesome. Thank you, Gemma, for having us.
Thanks, Gemma. I'm excited to be here.
So Devin, let me start the conversation with you. Tell us a little bit about the Shifting Gears program and how it got started.
Yeah, so Shifting Gears is a program that we run with BBP in partnership with the Idaho Department of Corrections. And it really started, it's working with currently incarcerated women. It really started because we noticed in SHOP we were serving a community that was reentering from incarceration, and they would show up on our doorstep and say, hey, I just got out. Transportation's a huge need. What can we do? So we went back to the Department of Corrections. We're saying, like, how can we partner to serve this need? And sort of tracing it back up the line, we realized along the way that anecdotally, some of the women who are incarcerated have less programming. It's a huge need for them to reenter our community. So we joined together to have programming that runs while they're incarcerated, in which they're able to earn a bicycle upon release. They're able to work in service to their community and earn a skill. And then down the line, we started looking at how that can benefit reentry and job placement as well.
So Erica, it seems contradictory to say that Idaho is one of the safest states in the nation, yet we have the highest number of incarcerated women. Talk to us about what kind of crimes women are serving here in Idaho.
Sure. While each woman and her life story is unique and what brings her into the system of incarceration is unique, from a data perspective, the overwhelming majority of women in prison in Idaho are serving time for a drug or alcohol offense. In our recent report, we studied a population snapshot from December 31st, 2021, and we found that 62% of the women in prison on that day were there where their most serious offense was categorized as a drug crime. An additional 7% of the women were there for an alcohol offense. And over 50% of the women, 52% of the women there were actually there where a drug possession charge was their lead offense. And only 16% of the women in prison on that day were actually there for a violent crime. And so this is an area where Idaho is a little bit of an outlier. In most states, their prisons the vast majority of people in other state prisons are there for violent crimes. And Idaho is sort of flipping that on its head, even though there's no evidence that men or women in Idaho are using substances at a higher rate than nationally.
So Erica, how does the number of women in jail compare to the number of men incarcerated in our state?
Yeah, the justice system is impacting overall a large percentage of the Idaho population, men and women. In this report we just finished, we focused on women's incarceration because Idaho is the leader in women's incarceration. We have the highest rate in the nation, but we have a lot of work to do for the men in the population as well. So when men and women are both considered, Idaho ranks in the top 5 as having the highest rate of incarceration overall in the country. And additionally, the Idaho Statistical Analysis Center issued a report that showed in 2017, 1 out of every 25 adult Idahoans was actually under some form of correctional control, meaning prison, jail, or on probation or parole. And that same year, actually 1 in every 102 adult Idahoans were actually behind bars. So the justice system in Idaho is pretty expansive, and it's impacting a lot of people, which really which is driven a lot by failures on community supervision and people being released and then going right back in this revolving door. So it's really exciting that programs like Boise Bicycle Project are really investing in this population to try to end that revolving door cycle.
So, Devin, let's go back to the program itself. How exactly does it work? I mean, how does a woman get involved, and then what does she do?
Yeah, so the women who participate in Shifting Gears are steered into that program. We work with some of the case managers at the correctional facility. And so we have a cohort of like 10 to 15 women who are interested in, that service aspect or that mechanical aspect or that reentry aspect. And the bare bones setup is that there's a BBP staff member or volunteer there. I'm sort of getting them launched. We teach them how to fix a kid's bike. We think we can do that in about 4 lessons, like a month. And they work to fix around 15 kids' bikes. And if they hit that 15 number, that's sort of the magic number for, quote, graduation. But that means that they have a refurbished bicycle waiting for them when they reenter. But beyond that, sort of the growth in the program that's been really interesting and what I've witnessed that's powerful is that it's really changed more into a peer mentorship program where the women who are approaching reentry are passing along those skill sets to the women who are joining the program. And that's very powerful. And then what's super important for us is alongside that skill of that bicycle skill that we know is a marketable skill in mechanics, they're able to join us in the community. And so we do community pop-ups where we have a safety course for kids to learn how to ride a bike safely. And we might do the bike giveaway at the same time. And so that cohort of women is able to come join us. Thanks to the Department of Corrections, they're able to run the safety course. Blue Sky Day, they're watching a bike they built get given to a kid. Everyone's interacting. It's sort of the community we want to build. And there's that restorative aspect where they're seen as a member of our community who is contributing in service because that's what they are.
So, Devin, my understanding is that you're expanding this program. So will you be working with a new facility? What will the expansion look like?
Yeah, so the Shifting Gears program was sort of pressed on pause like a lot of stuff during COVID in 2020, and we restarted at the South Boise Women's Correctional Center in 2023. We're really excited. This year, we're going to expand to the South Idaho Correctional Institution, which is another facility. It houses 800 incarcerated people, half of which are women. And so we're really hoping to double that program output. Since 2023, we've had over 85 women participate in the program. They've helped to distribute over 500 bikes to the community, countless safety courses and bike giveaways. They're joining us in the shop to work on bikes. And we're really hoping to double that output in our partnership with the Southern Idaho Correctional Institution.
Erica, it's my understanding that the majority of women here in Idaho who are behind bars are moms, which can really have a huge ripple effect within families. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. When we our data found our report actually relies on data that was collected by Dr. Shannon Lynch at the Idaho State University. And so this was data really actually analyzing and speaking with women in Idaho jails and prisons. And her data reported that over 80% of the women in Idaho jails and prisons are mothers. And in roughly 67% of those cases, the children were actually living with their mother immediately prior to their arrest. We know from national studies that a child who loses a parent to incarceration is 3 times as likely to end up in the justice system themselves. And so what we really see is this generational cycle where mom or a parent is going into incarceration and then the same thing is happening to the child down the road. And that's really why our report advocates for increasing access to treatment and mental health care, because our studies have also shown that, women are a majority of the women who are ending up in the justice system really in some point in their life started out as victims of crime themselves. A huge percentage of the women in jail and prison, both in Idaho and nationally, have experienced victimization, sexual abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence, and things like that, that often they're going untreated in the community. And so they're ending up in the justice system with these co-occurring issues involving their mental health and substance use disorder. And so our organization is really pushing and advocating for more treatment occurring in the community, and things that we can do to divert women out of the justice system and even invest in programs that actually are recovery-based programs that allow mothers to, when they get their lives stabilized, to actually be reunited with their or with their children, so that we can hopefully start ending this generational cycle of incarceration.
Erica, talk to us about women who are incarcerated in Idaho. And do we know what is causing them to be incarcerated? And again, as we said, we have the most women in the United States incarcerated in Idaho compared to other states.
Yeah, and so this is really, a lot of it comes down, I think, to the policies around drug crimes that Idaho is implementing. So first and foremost, if you think of the criminal justice system sort of like a funnel, Idaho is arresting more women per capita than other states in the nation for drug crimes in particular. And then there's more women statistically in our prisons than compared to other prisons for drug crimes in particular. And on top of that, women in Idaho are, when half of the women in prison are serving time for a possession charge, they're serving an average of 22 months for that possession charge compared to a national average sentence length of 13 months. And so if you think of it as this prison population is driven by like admissions as well as length of stay, we're putting more women in prison in the first place for drug crimes, and then they're staying twice as long as the national average. So that kind of explains why our incarceration rate for women is so high. But other things to note as well is, often women are not going to prison for their first drug possession charge. It's often after some form of, they've maybe were sentenced to a term of 5 to 7 years on probation. But for many women, the pathway to recovery isn't a completely straight line. And so there, some sort of relapse event is happening or something goes on where they're failing out on probation and getting violated and then going into prison, because we found that over 60% of the women in prison on that December 31st, 2021 snapshot day were there after some form of failure of community supervision. So that's kind of indicating, I think, to policymakers that there's some room for improvement there on just how women are able to access mental health care treatment options while they're on probation, or getting them, sort of an earlier intervention so that they don't need to ultimately, our judges don't feel the need to ultimately send them to prison in the first place. We can pursue more community-based options.
Erica, how much do you think mandatory minimums play into women being incarcerated in Idaho? Because we do have mandatory minimums for drug charges in Idaho. This was controversial when this went into effect because it basically takes away discretion from judges when it comes to these drug charges, right? So if there's a judge that says, look, this individual actually would benefit from, as you mentioned, getting access to care, mental health treatment, drug treatment, right? This might actually help them get on their feet. But that discretion has been taken away. And so now we have a blanket law of you have a mandatory minimum. And there are times where people do need to be sent to jail. However, when we take discretion away from judges sometimes, then we also then end up with the situation that we're in where we see so many women incarcerated in Idaho.
Yeah, I think the mandatory minimum issue is that's been a hot topic in the Idaho legislature over the last couple of years. Our organization does oppose introducing new mandatory minimums because statistically, we know that they don't actually decrease an individual's use of drugs. They don't actually help people get in recovery. They're basically just a cookie cutter approach to what's really a very nuanced issue and an individual issue in a lot of the women and men's lives that are impacted by substance use. And so in terms of an actual, public safety approach, I think that people expect our justice system to be this really fair system that they see reflected on law and order. And ideally it is, ideally the people who are doing bad things and need to be removed from society to protect the public, for those individuals, that should continue to happen. But what we see playing out in Idaho I think is a lot of people don't actually understand the impact that a lot of the sentencing laws have on individuals and their entire families and their children, because the mandatory minimums under Idaho's trafficking statute really kick in for relatively low levels of drug possession. They're called trafficking statutes, but really it just requires you to have a particular amount of a particular substance. For drugs like heroin, it's a pretty relatively low amount, like the amount of a sugar packet actually kicks in a trafficking mandatory minimum. And so, we oppose mandatory minimums for that reason, because we don't think they actually make the public safer. However, to be fair, the Idaho prisons are really, for women in particular, are filled with women being charged with possession charges. I think that our study found that there about 43 women were in prison on December 31st in 2021 for that trafficking charge with the mandatory minimum. However, those women are typically serving very lengthy sentences, ranging anywhere from 3 to 10 years. And so it does impact in that way, but the actual numbers are much smaller.
Devin, very quickly before we go, because I have to wrap up, I do want to point out that we are in the middle of Idaho Gives, which I know is one of BPP's largest fundraisers of the year. How can people help support your nonprofit?
Yeah, people can support this program and community building efforts similar to it by checking out our Instagram and our Facebook, and where you'll learn more about the stories we're telling this week about trying to build a community of positive connection. And you can go to boisebicycleproject.org and you can donate. And really what that allows us to do is support incredible life-changing programs like Shifting Gears, like some of the other transportation affirmative programs that we have.
I want to thank both of you so much. We've been speaking with Devin McComas, the executive director of the Boise Bicycle Project, and Erica Marshall, executive director of the Idaho Justice Project. We've been discussing the new expansion of BPP's Shifting Gears program.